Hey everybody, welcome to the first ever eDiscovery Today hosted webinar titled Looking for Validation, Evaluating Methods for Review in eDiscovery Today. If this one goes well, we'll do more of these. Over the next hour, I'll be discussing considerations related to different approaches to review for eDiscovery and how to help ensure a valid outcome. I'm going to hide my video here so we can focus on the screen and the slides. A couple of notes before we start. We do welcome questions, and you can submit them via either the Q&A button or the chat button on the screen there. I'll try to get to as many questions as I can over the course of the webinar, and we'll look to leave some time at the end for additional questions. I also welcome your comments in the chat. So if you have thoughts or even additional resources to share, please feel free to do so. If you've raised your hand, if you could put a note in the chat, that would be very helpful to me because I'm not sure what exactly you're looking for. But yes, please put a note in the chat and I will look to address it there. I do welcome comments in the chat, so if you have thoughts or even additional resources, please do so, and let's make this interactive. Also, the slides have links to numerous resources, and you'll receive a copy of them after the webinar, so look for those either later today or tomorrow. For those who don't know me, I'm Doug Austin, and I'm the editor of eDiscovery Today, a daily blog about eDiscovery, information governance, cybersecurity, data privacy, and artificial intelligence trends, best practices, and case law. I've been in the industry over 30 years, so I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. And I've been daily blogging for 15 years now, so I'm either committed or I ought to be. And here's what we're going to be talking about today. First, we'll talk about keyword search and why it shouldn't get the free pass it usually gets today. Then we'll take a look at Sedona Principle 6, and I'll give you my interpretation of what it really expects. Then we'll talk about whether generative AI will replace TAR for review based on opinions from thought leaders and an analysis of current trends. Next, we'll discuss the fundamentals to measuring the effectiveness of your review approach to make sure we're all on the same page for understanding best practices for validating review. Then we'll walk through two iterative approach examples that illustrate the process of improving the results in your review. And we'll close with 6 reasons why you should be validating your review approach, regardless what approach you use. And as I mentioned, I'll leave some time for questions as well as working questions along the way to the extent I can. Of course, any ideas expressed by me here today are my own, not those of my organization, clients, or partners. It's always valid to have a disclaimer in your webinar to protect yourself in case you say something you might regret. I should also note that I'll be using examples from eDiscovery providers to illustrate certain concepts, some of which are eDiscovery Today partners. No endorsement should be implied from any of these examples. They're merely examples to illustrate concepts using actual eDiscovery solutions. I've seen a few hands raised, so can somebody drop me a note in the chat and let me know if everyone is able to see the slides and able to hear me? Okay, I'm not seeing any notes in the chat, but I'm seeing some raised hands. So let's see here. Okay, Q&A. The chat is disabled. Okay, well that's there we go. Rookie mistake. Let me fix that. 1 second. My apologies. Let's see here. How do I do that? Okay, let's try it now. Chat hopefully is enabled and you can chat. So, wonderful. All right. There we go. Woo! All right, got that fixed. So, good deal. So, anyways, I was saying, any ideas expressed by me here today are my own, not those of my organization, clients, or partners. And I should note that I'll be using examples from eDiscovery providers to illustrate certain concepts, some of which are eDiscovery Today partners. nor no endorsement should be implied from any of these examples. They're merely examples to illustrate the concepts using actual eDiscovery solutions. All right, well, now I'm going to really try to get tricky here, and we're going to start with a poll question. So let me pull that up. All right. What I want to know is what approach or approaches your organization uses to facilitate e-discovery review for actual cases. I care only about review, not ECA or other workflows, and I care about use in actual cases, not tests of proof of concepts. The and or means you may use them together or separately across your caseload. So, for example, if you use at least if you use all three at least some of the time for review across your caseload, you would select choice number four. And for the purist out there, by TAR, I mean predictive coding methods like TAR 1.0 or CAL. So I'll give you a few more moments to make your selections. All right, a couple more seconds here. Make sure we've got given everybody a chance to participate. All right, see if we can get to 100 respondents. All right, maybe not quite there. We'll 99. We'll about to end the poll here. All right, we got to 100. That should be a pretty good representative group here. So I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So um, looks like looks like most of you use keyword search in some form. 32% use it with tar, and tar in cases. Looks like um, uh, most of you use all three at some point. Nobody uses only tar, and nobody uses only, or hardly anybody uses only Gen AI. So that's interesting. We've got a pretty good sample there of what we're seeing. So I will kind of grab that and we'll move on. All right. That's one confusing poll question. Yes, I'm sorry. I could have just given a select all that apply, but fair point. I will have to think about that for next time. Um, so let's get started with the discussion by talking about something nobody wants to talk about, keyword search. And we're going to talk about why it shouldn't get the free pass it usually gets. Gates Stockfish is the king of e-discovery memes, and I'm certainly not here looking to take his place, but I did put together a meme that I think illustrates how lawyers treat keyword search versus how they treat predictive coding and generative AI. So here it is. I think that symbolizes what we see with a lot of lawyers and legal professionals today. And by the way, hat tip to Ralph Losey's Visual Muse image generator, which generated the image I wanted on the first try after Microsoft Designer couldn't do it in 20 tries. A few years ago, Maura Grossman and Gordon Cormack wrote about the disparate treatment of TAR and keyword search, among other things, in a very frank article titled The eDiscovery Medicine Show, where they noted that TAR practitioners exposed to these methods naturally assumed that the use of statistics was unique to TAR and that statistical expertise was needed to employ TAR. Purveyors and pundits have harnessed this misconception to suggest that only the TAR tool should be subject to validation, while keyword culling and manual review should be exempt, as they always have been. I'm going to go out on a very sturdy limb and say I don't think they thought that was a good thing. So why shouldn't keyword search get the free pass it usually gets? Let's start the soapbox portion of the discussion with this bad example. It's a case from my home state of Texas from a few years ago where the parties negotiated search terms. Two of the terms were what you see here. The exclamation point symbol is the wildcard character in this case, and the /10 means within 10 words of. So clearly, it looked like the parties chose to add a wildcard to app to search for a phone or smartphone app, apps, application, or applications. Makes sense, right? However, there are more words in the English language that begin with app. So how many are there? There's this many, and this many, and this many, and this many. 449 words that begin with app, 445 of them are bad. Apparently, it appears the application of the search term was thought to be appealing when it was approximate or even appropriate. It was appalling. See what I did there? This is known as getting wild with wildcards, and it's one of the most common searching mistakes I've seen legal professionals make over the years. A much better search would have been to break out the individual terms with or separators to be much more precise, as you see in the example here. They also wildcarded phone, but not smartphone, which seems inconsistent, so I added that too. Keep in mind, the parties negotiated this awfully overbroad term, so neither of them realized just how bad a search term it really was. Fortunately for the defendants, Judge Andrew Austin, no relation, ruled that they weren't required to produce everything responsive to the search results like the plaintiff wanted. They still had the right to review them, but they had to review a lot of extra documents they wouldn't have had to review with a better search, which was punishment enough. By the way, you might be thinking, what kind of nerd knows there's 449 words in the English language that begin with that? The answer is Scrabble players, which use the online Merriam-Webster dictionary. It's not just good for them, it's also a great way to test wildcard terms. As you can see here, you can perform starts with and ends with searches to see what a wildcard might retrieve and avoid using those wildcards that are over-inclusive or under-inclusive. I provided links to examples for a starts with and ends with search that you can check out when you get the slides, where all you would have to do is substitute in the string you want to look for. And by the way, I'll just kind of toggle over to the site here for a second. Hopefully you all can see the site now. If not, please let me know. So if in that app example, if I say starting with app, there's your search there. So you get a sense of that, and you could look for anything. One of the examples I've written about in the past is one from my very first day of blogging when somebody was looking for mining terms, and they gave me a wildcard of MIN. And as you can see here, I got way more than just mining related terms. So this is kind of the challenge, and one of the things that's great about a site like this is you can see just how bad some of these terms can be if you haven't checked them out. By the way, some of you may have seen me discuss this example before, and I used to use a site called More Words, but in preparing for this webinar, it seemed that More Words has gotten a little bit glitchy and sketchy. So I looked for another site, and what better site than the dictionary we've trusted for over 2 centuries? That's true. I looked it up. And it also has almost 50% more words than More Words. Go figure. So over the years I've been using this example, I've been considerably understating the number of words. So it's a good thing I found this site. After all, you don't want to retrieve a message that said, I wrote an Appaloosa in the Appalachians when you're looking for phone apps, right? Regardless, for this case, a very simple web search that would have taken less than 10 seconds to um, type out here could have saved hours and hours of efforts in the bank pass case. All right, back to the slides. There we go. Nope. Nope. All right, voila. All right, want more bad examples? Here they are. The January 6th investigation may no longer be a thing, but these bad search terms from the House Select Committee linger on, and there are several bad examples from among the 82 terms in the list that was provided. So let's start with some likely under-inclusive search terms. In the first example, the committee apparently isn't concerned with people who've been stealing the election, just people who stole it. In the second example, we see a wild card that actually isn't wild enough. The placement of it leaves out the ing form of the word, which is a pretty common mistake that I see. And here are some likely over-inclusive term examples. The first set is a list of 7 states that are terms by themselves, no other words combined with them to limit their scope. So apparently, any document mentioning any one of these states during that time period is considered potentially conspiratorial. The last two of examples on the slide are more examples of wildcards getting wild. The first term, which I assume was looking for war games, ran the gamut of 204 terms that begin with GAM, which is quite a gamble. And if they were looking for documents involving rigging the election, and the second one, their lack of rigor means they got 107 terms that begin with RIG, which just isn't right. And this may be my favorite common mistake, what I call the Department of Redundancy Department search. In the first example, they have 4 searches that are specific proximity searches, but then they add a superset term, election, that makes the other 4 searches irrelevant, unless they're just trying to get initial counts. But since they submitted these terms to Trump's lawyer, that doesn't seem to be the case. The second example uses 4 specific government websites, but then adds the superset.gov, which not only makes those 4 federal government site terms irrelevant, but it also picks up state and local government sites as well because they use the .gov too. That could be as many as 5,300 possible additional websites. I could be wrong, but I don't think too many of those had anything to do with the presidential election. This slide illustrates that first example. You all remember the Venn diagram and unions and intersections, right? The wildcard term of corrupt combined with the wildcard term of election with a proximity of within 5 words yields a nicely targeted search, in theory at least. But when you add the superset term, that term and the other 3 terms become swallowed up by it. Basically, those 4 searches are, as a result, rendered irrelevant. Unless the reasoning is simply to find out the number of documents responsive to these searches, the combination of searches just doesn't fit well together. The keyword searching is so intuitive, you say. I can always understand what a search is doing, you say. In fact, Jamie said it in the comments there. Really? Let's try this one. This is just one of 25 search strings for a case I covered a few years ago. Can you tell what's going on here? Takes a while. After looking at it for a bit, I can tell you that they're looking for any one of 37 terms within 7 words of any one of 11 terms, and all that within 25 words of several variations of US and North America. I know, yes, they do miss within 7 and within 25, yes. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot that can go wrong. So when you're dealing with complex search strings, one way to analyze them is with a search term report, with a list of hits for each of the individual terms within the list. This example from Lexby shows a couple of things to look for. The first is terms with 0 hits. If a term has 0 hits, it could mean that the term is misspelled or that the phrase is too specific. So you can check to confirm the term is correct. If it is correct and you're still receiving 0 hits, then maybe you can exclude that term from the string for the next iteration. The other thing to look for is unique hit count. Those are documents with hits that don't occur for any other term in the list. If that's a high number, this could be an overbroad term that you may need to consider modifying or even removing, as it can mean a lot of extra documents to review that may not be responsive. I once received a search string from a client where one of the terms was simply China, which had tens of thousands of unique hits. With the search term report, we were able to quickly show the client that this term was way overbroad and that it should be modified to eliminate these hits that were very likely not responsive to the case. So hopefully the wildcard check and the search term report illustrate how validation of search terms can occur on the front end before you get too far into committing to these terms. Into the soapbox portion of this discussion. So let's shift gears now. I cover a lot of case law, 60 to 70 cases a year, and I'm seeing more cases where parties are justifying their approach to discovery and discovery review by using Sedona Principle 6. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Sedona Principles, I have a link to the most recent edition of the principles on this slide. Sedona Principle 6 is probably the most famous of the 14 Sedona Principles, and it says that responding parties are best situated to evaluate the procedures, methodologies, and technologies appropriate for preserving and producing their own ESI. It's been referenced in a lot of cases, probably most famously in Hiles versus New York City, where New York Magistrate Judge Andrew J. Peck, who is now my colleague on monthly case law webinars on the EDRM network, referenced Sedona Principle 6 as a reason not to order New York City to use tar against their will, even though he was and is an advocate for the use of tar in appropriate cases. After all, he was the first judge to approve the use of tar in the De Silva Moore case in 2012. Hiles illustrates that a responding party can't be forced into a particular approach for discovery. They have the ability to choose their own approach. But does that mean that parties can and should totally do whatever they want? I'm not so sure about that. Let's look at Sedona Principle 6 a little more closely. There's two words that stick out to me with regard to Sedona Principle 6, evaluate and appropriate. If we define those terms, we see that evaluate is to determine the value of, and appropriate is suitable or proper in the circumstances. So can a party choose a particular approach to discovery, including how they handled review within discovery? Sure, but I think Sedona Principle 6 expects parties to evaluate any approach they decide to take regarding review and discovery to ensure that it's appropriate. To me, that involves a level of validation of the approach that's being taken. It's also important to note that Principle 6 isn't the only Sedona principle. There's 13 other principles that establish expectations on parties in discovery as well. For example, Sedona Principle 3 expects parties to confer and seek to reach agreement regarding eDiscovery, which sets the expectation that it's a cooperative process. Another reason for responding parties to ensure their approach is appropriate. Sedona Principle 4 establishes that responses and objections to discovery should disclose the scope and limits of the production, which requires some level of evaluation of the approach to do so. And Sedona Principle 11 discusses how a responding party may satisfy its good faith discovery obligations by doing things such as sampling. That principle does say may, not must, but it still establishes that sampling and testing to validate results is a good idea, regardless of your approach to discovery. An excellent example of a protocol that discusses validation, transparency, and cooperation requirements is the protocol from the In re broiler chicken antitrust litigation case from 2018. This protocol, which was developed through the efforts of Special Master Moore R. Grossman, was entered into an order by Illinois Magistrate Judge Jeffrey Gilbert in early 2018. People think of it as just a tar protocol, and it addresses tar, but it also provides parameters for validation and cooperation on keyword search as well. The protocol calls for the producing party to share recall and precision estimates, sample sizes, and confidence intervals to substantiate the validation of their approach. And the application of the protocol was ordered in a case just this year, the In re insulin pricing litigation case with Judge Singh in New Jersey. This protocol provides an excellent example of evaluating your approach to determine whether or not it's appropriate, which is what Sedona Principle 6 expects. I should also provide a hat tip to Kelly Twigger and Minerva 26 for links to the case rulings like this one. So thanks to the folks at Minerva 26. All right, so now let's shift into something a little more fun. Will generative AI replace tar? A lot of people think it will. And if you look at this graph from the 2025 State of the Industry report released back in January by eDiscovery Today, it's easy to see why. In our survey last year, 26% of 551 respondents said they expected LLMs and Gen AI to have a transformative effect in 2025. If you add the people who expected it to at least create new workflows, that means more than 4 in 5 of respondents said they expected it to at least create new workflows this year. You see the quote from Jeff Fugit of Lexby and his observation that LLMs and Gen AI have transformed eDiscovery by improving document review efficiency, enhancing early case assessment, and automating privilege and relevance determination. And that's pretty heavy stuff. But overall, I think the experts are somewhat split as to whether Gen AI will replace TAR, at least in the near future. Some people think it will, like Matt Mann of Level Legal, who said he expects it to eventually, as did Robert Keeling of Redgrave LLP, who said that he expects it to eventually replace TAR for responsiveness review. And Mary Mack, CEO of EDRM, notes how Gen AI is an improvement over predictive coding. And Michael Sarich, who was a FOIA director at the VA, cites the speed and cost factors. Others don't think so, at least anytime soon. Stephanie Clerkin of Corey and Tillery said not entirely. Mike Quartararo, who's on this webinar, said he doesn't think it replaces it. He thinks they complement each other in different ways and for different use cases, which I've heard from a lot of folks. And Judge Rodriguez says the uncertainty of how courts will treat it should keep TAR around for a while. So, where does that leave us? Well, let's look at the numbers. For all 5 years of the State of the Industry report, we've asked the question, what percentage of your cases use predictive coding technologies? And there were 6 choices each year. All of your cases, most of your cases, about half of your cases, some of your cases, very few of your cases, and no cases. For the first 3 years, the numbers were pretty stagnant. In fact, the first year of the survey was the best of the first 3 years in terms of adoption and use of predictive coding. So if anything, we were staying still or even regressing. But if you look at the last 2 years, the Gen AI years, I would call them, where the surveys were conducted in late 2023 and late 2024, respectively, you see that these are the first 2 years where the percentage of respondents who use predictive coding for all or most of their cases is larger than the percentage of respondents who use predictive coding for very few or none of their cases. The last survey is the first where less than 25% of respondents said they used predictive coding in very few or none of their cases, with only just over 7% saying they don't use it in any cases. So maybe Judge Peck is onto something when he says AI may increase the use of TAR as conservative lawyers ignore the most current technology. So far, that seems to be the case. And yes, Judge Peck has seen these stats. So I think he's they probably kind of justified his viewpoint there. But as Mike points out, do you really have to select the vanilla of TAR or the chocolate of generative AI? Why not both? That's what 3 well-respected data scientists, Tara Emery, Dr. J. Jeremy Pickens, and Wilzette Lewis, suggested in their Sedona Conference Journal article from last year, where they suggested that Gen AI and TAR are complementary, not conflicting, and that workflows involving Gen AI can involve the same steps at a different iteration cycle. If you look at their workflow for discriminative TAR 1, it involves the traditional training involving training documents, selecting, reviewing, applying them, and assessing whether the model is trained enough. Their workflow that incorporates Gen AI involves the same steps, except for the iterate model, where the iteration involves writing, testing, and modifying the Gen AI prompt until we feel the prompt is sufficient. In each approach, once training is complete, you use the model to classify all remaining unclassified documents. And both approaches involve a validation cycle on the back end. Having said that, the capabilities and transparency of Gen AI may force the workflows to change. This illustration using Beagle shows how intuitive and transparent the process can be. Here you're asking the model a simple question. Is it a document or communication that relates to the marketing, promotion, or advertising of opioids? This could be one of several questions you use to determine which documents in your collection are responsive to the case. What you get back is not just the simple classification of the document that TAR gives you. You get an explanation as to why the document was classified the way it was, and even references within the document that as to where the information came from on which the model based its decision. It's still important to validate that the model correctly pulled the right information to make its determinations, but the workflows to get to that validation stage could be considerably streamlined. So we'll see what the findings are in the next State of the Industry report in January regarding the industry's latest take on the state of TAR versus Gen AI. So now let's talk about measuring the effectiveness of your review approach. This may be basic for some of you, but I kind of feel it's important to get us all on the same page. And I know some of you got into the legal profession because they said there would be no math. But the good news is that you shouldn't have to do the math, but it's important to understand it at least at an introductory level. What I want to stress is this. These concepts for validation apply regardless of which review approach you use, TAR, Gen AI, or even keyword search. Hopefully, the earlier part of the webinar stressed the importance of validating your keyword search approach as much as you need to validate the other approaches. So let's start by defining some terms. When you perform a query such as a keyword search or perform some action that selects a group of documents, such as applying TAR or Gen AI training to classify documents, you get two groups of documents. The documents returned by the query as responsive to the criteria, which is the result set, and the documents not returned, the rest of the documents, which is considered the null set. We then use three counts to help us determine how valid our results were. The first one, true positives, is a good thing as it involves the count of items we retrieve that are actually relevant. We like those. The other two aren't so good. False positives are items we retrieve that aren't relevant, and those can get expensive if we have a lot of them, especially if we decide to review everything we retrieved. False negatives are non-retrieved items that are relevant. Those are items we missed, which reduces the effectiveness of our query. False negatives are almost always estimated because we're never going to review all of our unretrieved items to determine whether they're relevant or not. That defeats the purpose of conducting the query in the first place. True and false positives may be estimated depending on the size of the result set, as we'll see in a bit. So using those numbers, we calculate at least three measurements to see how we did in our query. Precision is the ratio of true positives over the total of true and false positives. Precision may be estimated depending on how big our result set is. Elution is based on a count of relevant items we didn't retrieve over the total sample we conducted of the null set. We then estimate the total false negatives based on that ratio by multiplying the elution percentage by the total size of the null set to get an estimate of the documents that eluded the search, hence the name elution. From that, we're able to calculate recall as a ratio of the true positives over the true positives plus the estimated total false negatives. Those numbers are often represented in ranges, and there are other things that can be calculated, such as F1 score or richness, but we'll leave it at that for now. Confused yet? Maybe this example will help. Let's say we have 100,000 documents. We perform a query and we get 15,000 as responsive to the query. So we review all 15,000 and we find out that 8,000 of them are relevant, there are true positives. But we find out that 7,000 are not relevant, they're false positives. Then out of the 85,000 documents we didn't retrieve, which is the null set, we sample 500 and find that 10 of those are relevant, which are confirmed false negatives. We don't have to estimate precision because we reviewed the entire result set. So 8,000 true positives over the total, 8,000 plus 7,000, gets us a precision rate of about 53%. That's pretty bad. It means that almost half the documents we retrieved aren't relevant. So we spent quite a bit of time and money reviewing the wrong documents. Our elution rate is 2%, 10 out of the 500 documents we sampled. If we apply that 2% to the null set of 85,000 documents, that means we estimate that we missed roughly 1,700 documents. So our estimated recall is our 8,000 true positives over that same number plus the estimated false positives of 1,700 to get us an estimated recall rate of about 82.5%. Could be better, but that's not too bad. Of course, you're thinking those are some challenging calculations, but the good news is that many eDiscovery platforms will do these calculations for you. And here's an example from Beagle, where they calculate precision, recall, elution, and also richness, with a range for each and a number in the middle. So you may not need to calculate these numbers, but it's important to understand what they mean. The higher estimated recall and higher precision, actual or estimated, you get, the more on target your result set probably is. That takes care of precision, elution, and recall. What about sampling? How do you know how many documents to test? You don't need to do math here either, but you do need to know what numbers you need. Here are the three things you need to know: size of the test set, confidence level, and margin of error. The size of the first test set will be the result set, but you'll also want to test the null set as well. An appropriate confidence level is somewhere between 95 and 99%, and an appropriate margin of error is 5% or less, and typically 5% is fine. Ultimately, you don't have to sample that much necessarily to obtain an acceptable statistical sample. If you have a search that retrieves 100,000 documents and you want a 99% confidence level with a 5% margin of error, you only have to review 662 documents to get that. It's even less of a 95% confidence level will do, only 383 documents. For the 1 million documents not retrieved, you hardly have to review much more for a much bigger document set. Only four more documents, 666 documents and 385 documents, respectively. Here's a site where you can calculate the sample size you need. In calculator.net, you can simply input the confidence level, margin of error, and population size. You can leave the population proportion alone. You hit calculate and you have your sample size. And if you're spooked by the 666 number on a population size of 1 million, maybe the 95% confidence level works better for you. So let's take a quick look at that site here as I toggle over to this. So that 99% confidence level with a 5% margin of error and a population of 100,000 documents, you can tell I've done this before. You can calculate that to get a sample size there. Change 100,000 to a million, 10 times as much, and the sample size is only 4 documents more. If you change the confidence level downward, then your sample size gets to be a lot less. So it's pretty much that easy to determine what your sample size needs to be. And that's something that you can certainly do in a site like this. So that's great, you say, but what about selecting the random sample? There's a site for that too. Random.org enables you to generate random numbers for your random sample. So you enter the size of your random sample, the start and end of your range, typically from 1 to the size of your document set, how many columns you want the results in, and then you press the Get Numbers button. You'll get a list of randomly selected numbers, which can be record numbers in your set to be reviewed for the test. By the way, in this example, that's why I selected one column. It enables me to paste the results into an Excel sheet and sort the list. So let's take a look at that real quick. All right, so we know that we wanted 666 as our random sample size, and we want it from between 1 and a million, and we want to change it to format to in one columns. We press Get Numbers, and we get our columns just like that. So we take these and copy them, copy that set of numbers into an Excel spreadsheet and paste them. And then we simply sort that. We've got a sorted list of a random sample of documents that is, quick and easy to generate. So that illustrates how easy it can be. Again, you probably won't need to use these sites if your eDiscovery platform supports sampling, but it does show how easy it can be, and you'll still need to specify the parameters to get the sample size in an eDiscovery platform. You just won't have to actually generate the random sample. So with all those fundamental concepts under our belt, let's walk through a couple of iterative examples of validating and improving our retrieval of documents using a couple of different approaches. We'll start with a keyword search example, which is a hypothetical based off a real search example I was asked to perform for a client years ago. So let's say we're looking for documents at an oil company related to oil rights in an ownership dispute. We conduct a search for oil and rights, and we get 200,000 documents in our result set. Even though we got 1 million documents in our null set, our result set is really large too. So we're not going to review them all. We're going to sample both the result set and the null set. The sample size is almost identical for both, 664 for the result set, 666 for the null set. Of the result set sample, we determine that 24 are responsive. All but one, 665 out of 666 of the null set are non-responsive, as they should be. We perform our calculations and we find that precision is only 3.61%. That's terrible. If we were to go ahead and review all 200,000 documents, only roughly 7,229 of them would likely be responsive, meaning we would waste our time on review of likely over 190,000 of them. As for the null set, based on our sample, only 0.15% of those is a false negative. That estimates to 1,502 false negatives missed and an estimated recall rate of 82.8%. Based on the really low precision rate, we can determine that our search was way over-inclusive. Now, in real life, I worked for an oil company client that asked me to do this actual search, and I got more than 200,000 documents, which I knew was a lot. When I spot checked the result, I quickly realized at least one problem with the search was that we were pulling back pretty much every published and copyrighted document mentioning oil because they had the phrase in them, copyright, all rights reserved, in the document. There was no need to perform a full sample because it was immediately evident that the search was flawed. So I reported what I found to my client, and we revised the search. Often a simple spot check of the results can let you know where you've gone wrong. So you want to use common sense when validating your results and not spending more time than needed if you already know you need another iteration. All right, so back to the hypothetical. Let's say we change the search to the phrase oil rights. That will eliminate those copyright documents, and it sure does. This time we only get 1,500 documents in our result set, with the rest in the null set. Even though we had a much smaller result set, our sample size is still proportionally much larger as a percentage of the result set, 462. The sample size of the null set remains unchanged at 666. Of the 462 items we reviewed in the result set, 439 of them are responsive. Of the 666 items we reviewed in the null set, 648 of them are non-responsive. Performing our calculations, we find that precision is over 95%, which is excellent. But we find a relatively high elution rate of 2.7%, which means there are a whopping estimated 32,000 plus documents that we missed as false negatives. So when we calculate estimated recall, it's only 4.21%, which is terrible. So this time our search is way under-inclusive, and we'll miss an estimated 32,300 plus out of 33,800 plus responsive documents. That's unacceptable. So let's give it one more try. This time we'll try a proximity search of oil within 5 words of rights. Our result set is 9,229 documents, which is more than our previous test, but way less than our first one. The sample size for our result set is 621, while the sample size for the null set is, once again, 666. We find 562 items responsive in our result set, and we find 664 items non-responsive in our null set. Calculating precision, we find over a 90% precision rate, which is excellent. With an elution rate of 0.3%, we estimate the false negatives to be 3576, which gives us an estimated recall rate of about 70%. Could be better, but not that bad. The false negatives may show us that we need a wider range in our proximity search. Regardless, we found a much better search, and we only had to review 12,353 documents, which could have even been less if we were okay with a 95% confidence level. That's over 187,000 documents that we didn't have to review because we chose to test the first search and realized that it was way overbroad. That's what an iterative approach can do for keyword searching. Let's do one more iterative example, this time involving generative AI prompt iteration. This example isn't mine, it's actually from Ben Sexton of JND eDiscovery using relativity error for illustration. So thanks to Ben and Christian Trailer of Relativity for this example. As you see here by the chart, we have an iterative workflow where we first draft a prompt for generative AI, followed by a process where we test the prompt on a sample set, evaluate the results, and revise the prompt until it's considered to be complete. Then we apply the prompt to the entire collection and validate the results. This is similar to the iterate model we discussed in the Sedona conference article a few slides ago. Here's an example of the prompt that was drafted in relativity error. You see an overview of the matter on the left-hand side, as well as a list of people and aliases to look for in the collection. The right-hand side has a rather detailed prompt that identifies several categories of documents that should be considered relevant. There's actually a 15th category that doesn't quite fit on the page. So this is the prompt that we're starting with. For this iteration at least, we might have already gone through some iterations before this one. This slide illustrates that iterative process, testing the prompt on a sample set, evaluating the results, and revising the prompt if needed. So here's the screen in relativity error that shows the beginning of that iteration. We see there have been 69 documents analyzed with classifications of not relevant, borderline, and relevant. What we also see is, over on the right-hand side, 2 documents identified the model as non-relevant that are in conflict with classifications issued by the reviewers. This screen shows those 2 documents where the reviewer marked the documents as responsive, while the model marked them as non-responsive. So we need to take a look at each document to see why we have a conflict. Looking at the first document, we see on the left-hand side why the AI model determined that the document was not relevant. It provides the rationale based on the prompt that was given, where it described why it was not classified, or why it was classified as not relevant, and the considerations as well. On the right side, we see that the document was marked responsive by the reviewer, and we see in the prompt iteration notes that anything related to historic preservation is very relevant. With the second document, it's a similar story. The AI model marked the document not relevant based on the prompt that was given. But the reviewer marked the document responsive because documents related to donations or membership in the National Trust for Historic Preservation should be marked relevant. So, the review we performed in this iteration enabled us to see that our prompt wasn't complete. So we add the 2 additional relevance criteria that were fleshed out by the reviewers to the prompt. That enables us to rerun another iteration, and this time we find that we have no conflicts, so our prompt may be ready to run against the full collection. Hopefully, I did a good job of explaining that, and hopefully, this example illustrates an iterative approach to generative AI prompt creation. Again, thanks to Ben Sexton and Kristen Traylor for that example. So, hopefully, everything we've discussed here illustrates why you need to validate your review approach, regardless what approach you're using. But here's a summary of 6 reasons to validate your review approach as a final takeaway. The first is simply that validation helps ensure that you identify the evidence that impacts the case. After all, that's the most important thing, right? You need to know what evidence there is so you can decide whether to litigate, settle, or attempt to dismiss the case. The next reason to validate is that it helps you object with specificity under Rule 34b2b. Since the changes to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure in 2015, responding parties are expected to object with specificity instead of providing boilerplate objections. Validation helps provide the specific details you need to meet your obligations under Rule 34b2b. Next, validation helps you contain costs by helping to ensure precise results. And we've seen several examples of that in this discussion. The ability to validate your processes can help you identify wildcards that are too wild and other issues that can lead to overbroad results, which can get expensive. Another reason to validate your review approach is that it can help you identify potentially privileged or confidential information so that you can avoid inadvertently disclosing that information to the other side. Validating your review approach is also self-documenting. So it helps you defend your approach to opposing counsel and to the court if necessary. And finally, validating your review approach can help you reduce motion practice, which is another thing that can that can also drive up discovery costs. So that takes us to the question slide. So let's see what additional questions we have. I'll pop back on my video here, see if we have any in the Q&A. Okay. Yes, the answer is yes, it is being recorded. At least it hopefully is, if I got that right. So yes, and we will share a link to the recording for anybody who didn't catch the full thing or wants to watch part of it again. Here's a question. Yes, and we will send the slides as well after the webinar, so you'll get a link to both the slides and the recording. Here's a question that asks about the discoverability of generative AI prompts. Are they discoverable in discovery? That's a good question. One of the things actually I saw Bill Hamilton. We were just having a discussion a few days ago about whether we've seen any case law on that yet. Certainly, I can see an argument from a standpoint that generative AI prompts have a potential attorney work product as part of those prompts. So I could understand why they could be considered privileged, but at the same time, I also understand the potential that they are the indicator of how documents may have been classified. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if we have any additional case law that comes in that. Yeah, Jamie notes that discovery on discovery is disfavored, and I certainly agree with that. So I definitely think that's going to be one of the things that will come into play. And certainly Bill's noting probably discoverable if there's a bona fide challenge to the production, which I also agree with. Another argument that they are protected. And Kristen hosted a session at RELFest last year where they did a mock argument on that topic, which was really great. So definitely, I think an issue that we will continue to see, but that seems as though we've got those are all the questions I have here at the moment. Let me scan back through. All right. Well, then looks like I'm gonna give you a few minutes back on your day, and want to say thank you for everybody who attended today, and we'll catch you next time on the eDiscovery Today Network. Goodbye, everybody.